It's a pleasure to see all of you here. We're missing several, but not certain about Adriana. Never heard anything about today. And we're missing Farron and Sandra. And Farron had not a good day, had some bleeding again. So, and Richard's not doing too well today, so we miss him. I know I'm leaving others out. Who am I leaving out? Some in here. Dean and Jimmy, yeah. Good news, you see Lee here, and I'm just really happy. Today has been one of the, this afternoon has been a better day. One of the first she's had since last week, and I'm glad about that. Glad to have Greg and Melanie here. And there is some really good news that Gene, I know, wants to share with you. You want to do that later, Brother Gene, about Rylant? Well, I'm just going to tell you the good things about Rylant, and then Brother Gene can maybe tell a little bit later about the details. But just know it's really good news. A cease and or desist order about the biological father, and so things are working very much in favor for Stephen and Amy. So we're really thankful for that. Okay. We have our readings briefly, and then we'll go right into our lesson in our time between the Testaments, the years of silence. Our readings take us from, if you conclude Sunday, 2 Samuel 19 through tonight would be 1 Kings 5. 2 Kings 19 to 1 Kings 5. Did I say 2 Kings? I mean 2 Samuel through 1 Kings 5. 2 Samuel is about the life of whom? David. And things are going very well. David's triumphs in 1 through 10, his troubles, or at least his temptation, his trial in 11 with the adultery with Bathsheba, the murder of Uriah, and then 12 through the end really record a number of problems. I think it's interesting that back in chapter 8, his righteous, his just rule is described. Things are going so well. In chapter 7, we have those, oftentimes we call them the Davidic promises. I will make of you, I'll make your house great, and your son, not you, will build me a temple, and then the throne and kingdom will be for how long? Forever. So those three promises that are in 2 Samuel 7, 11 through 16 are very important. Things are going well, but then David's sin and then the problems all indicate that as good as David was, people could look for a better one, wherein there is perfect righteousness and justice. So in our readings in 2 Samuel chapter 9, let me turn to it so I can get on the same page with you. In 2 Samuel chapter 19, what do we have? Yes. What had he not done? That's enough. You got to be leading the people. That's exactly right. And so Joab reproof for David, and then David has, what happens at 20? There's another rebellion from whom? Sheba. Right, and then in 20, also we have the murder of who? Whom? Amasa, right. And then we have in 21 some of the famine in 3 years that occurred. Some of David's officers are mentioned. The Gibeonites avenged on Saul. And then in 22, we start to really wind down. What does David do in 22? A psalm of praise. And then in 23, his last song, his mighty men are identified, and they were leaders. In 24, what happens to the people? They're numbered. And is that a good thing or a bad thing here? It's a bad thing, yeah. And it's almost like David is now taking more confidence in the army and the numbering than he is God. But to his credit, toward the end of here, David wants to build an altar. He does indeed build an altar, and there's a fellow who wants to give him some land, and it's really about the area where the temple is going to be built. And David, to his credit, says, what, Lee? Exactly. Exactly. He was not going to take something that was just given to him and offer that for the Lord. Verse 24 is such a tremendous principle here. The king said to Araunah, "No, I will verily buy it to thee at price. Neither will I offer burnt offerings and sacrifices to my God, which cost me nothing." I'm going to give something to the Lord, that's worth something. And that goes back to our idea of, not our idea, but the idea that's throughout the Scripture about bringing to the Lord your best, doing your best in every way. All right, comment, question on 2 Samuel. Exactly. Malachi is yeah, the things that you didn't care to offer anyway. Exactly right. Good. Do in our service, if it's leading singing, if it's prayers, teaching classes, whatever it is, work on the building. We want to give our best and in service in every way to the Lord. All right, in 1 Kings, we have basically divided into the first 11 chapters that describe the reign of whom? Solomon. And then through from chapter 12 down to 2 Kings 17, we have the divided kingdom. Then 18 through 25 of 2 Kings, Judah alone. So in chapter 1, we'll just take the first few chapters, first 5 chapters, real quickly. David is described in his old age, and he had a problem a lot of us have as we get old. Couldn't stay warm, yeah. And somebody is brought in to kind of help him stay warm. Who is it? Abishag. And that becomes a problem a little later, not a problem for David rather, but who would actually what, Lee? Are you thinking with me? Who would actually? Adonijah. And exactly. He would inherit the father's throne if he had her. So he is an attempted usurpation, the American Standard has as a topical heading for part of chapter 1. And that continues on. In chapter 2, we have some really wonderful language here. David's charged to whom? To Solomon. And you do what is right. If your children take heed to their way to walk before you with all your heart, that's good. And then he warned him about somebody in verse 5. Who is it? You know also who? Joab, yes. And then David dies in verse 10. David slept with his fathers. He had reigned for 40 years. And Adonijah wants to have Abishag. And then what happens to Adonijah? He's killed. Then what happens to Joab a little later? He's killed. And then we have in chapter 3, Solomon makes an affinity with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He's got a marriage with a lady. His prayer at Gibeon that he might have what? Wisdom. And God was so pleased with his request that he gave him a couple of other things that he didn't even ask for. What were they? Riches and what else? And honor, right. And so we have that in chapter 3. In chapter 4, what about Solomon is illustrated through something that he does here? What's that, Patty? 4, Or 3. I'm sorry. The latter part of 3 is the baby. Yeah, he's showing his what? His wisdom. His wisdom in that. My bad on the chapter. And then in 4, there's a passage in chapter 4 that's really, it's kind of piling up the good things about Solomon's empire, Solomon's, I should say, his reign instead of his empire, his officers and all that. But if you drop down to verse 21, this is a passage you might want to highlight because it shows that it's under Solomon that the extended land promise of Genesis, the 15th chapter, is fulfilled. Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the river unto the, that is the river of Egypt, unto the land of the Philistines, and unto the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. So they had conquered or subdued all the way down to the river of Egypt, all the way over to the Euphrates. Now they did not live in all that area, but they had subdued it. And hence, if you keep your hand there, go all the way back to Genesis, the 15th chapter. We have the land of Canaan proper promised to Abraham, as well as Isaac and Jacob. But if you'll notice down in chapter 15 of Genesis in verse 18, in that day Jehovah made a covenant with Abraham, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of what? Egypt to the great river Euphrates. And see, that was not really fulfilled until the days of Solomon. And so we have that, and that's just another thing that we can see in our reading. Okay, let's stop there, and we'll pick up, Lord willing, on Sunday with the rest of our readings. Okay, we are in, by the way, does everyone have the handouts that we gave the other day? The Exile and Restoration. This is all from Baker's Bible Atlas. It deals primarily with Persia. You have that one, and then the other one, the Hellenistic Age. You don't have it, Sister Glenda? Let's see here. I'll give that to you. These are just copies of 2 chapters out of, that's where we were Sunday, out of Baker's Bible Atlas. And I had felt like they were so good I wanted to share with you. Anybody else need any more? Okay. And what I want to do is refer to these and refer to the Waldron material, and then go over some maps and some things that correspond to the Waldron material. All right, here we go with the Medo-Persian Empire. I'm just going to stand aside and we'll talk through it together. Always remember, when you see a big map, if you didn't have anything, just know, okay, the Mediterranean, and here's Israel, and even if you can't, if you find the Sea of the Dead Sea, just think a little bit to the left, and you have Jerusalem. And then, well, I'm not going to go over in detail. I'm just going to speed through this. But Cyrus allowed them to return, and then under Zerubbabel, they build the what? They build the temple. He's followed by Cambyses, that is, Cyrus is. The temple, though, is not finished until about 520 to 516. The prophets had encouraged the temple. Then at 516, it was finally built. Darius exercised more control. We have roads. Engineers designed a canal. He desired to push his empire westward toward these little Greek states, city-states that were being established. They did go toward Thrace and toward Macedonia, or Macedon, and yet they were defeated at Marathon, which is right here. It's interesting that, I don't think I mentioned this, I should have, Sunday morning. What happened as some of the Greeks saw that they're in the fleet here in the Aegean, they were turning from Marathon looking like they were going to Athens, but the Persians had been defeated. Then there's a runner who gets out from, leaves the scene of Marathon, and he runs all the way to Athens. And he tells them, he breaks into the Senate and says, we're victorious, we've won. That is at Marathon. And hence we got from that what? The marathon race, yeah. And it's about how many miles is the marathon? About 20, yes. And that's about how far it is from Marathon to Athens. All right, so we move on. Darius is succeeded by Xerxes, and we have the record of Esther. He prepares for an invasion of Greece to avenge the father's defeat at Marathon. And so as he's going this way, but the same thing happened. He's defeated. After he returns, He chooses a new queen at his palace, and of course that's Esther down here at Shushan. And the events that occurred recorded in Esther about this time happened during the reign of Xerxes. He's assassinated by a guard. His son Artaxerxes begins, and it was during his reign that the events of Ezra and Nehemiah, or at least they're coming to Jerusalem, and then Malachi's prophecy occurred over here. So we have the end of the Old Testament at this time. The empire continues with uprisings, Artaxerxes having to squelch these uprisings in Cyprus as well as down here in Egypt. Persians' dominance is weakening and Greek opposition continues to rise. Now, we leave off where we were Sunday. We're going to go on through this. The end of Persia was just kind of like, you remember when we studied the divided kingdom, and when we come to the end of Israel, it was just, after Jeroboam II had a long reign and things were prosperous, at least financially, geographically, but spiritually they were bankrupt. But after that, it was just downhill. One king was assassinated after another. That's very much like it was with Persia. 5 of them reigned, none of them saw the glory. Egypt rebelled, Asia Minor rebelled, kings were murdered, and so as a result of that, you've got a weakening, really a vacuum that's created. And these Greek city-states are increasing in power, and they are chafed at what had happened under Darius when they come over there and the Persians sack Athens, and the Acropolis is destroyed. And so that really was the impetus for them to take out after the Persians. This is kind of a follow-up on that Richie Thetford had. The Thrace, identify, where's Macedon, guys? Anybody? Right next to Thrace, right. Where is the Hellespont? What is the Hellespont anyway? Good. And it divides what 2 continents? Europe and Asia. And what's it also known as? Starts with a D. That's right, Dardanelle. Okay, good. So that's there. Athens, Salamis. We've got Salamis and Paphos on the Isle of Cyprus as cities, but Salamis is up here close, another Salamis that's close to Athens. Where's the Halys River? Anybody? Good. Yes. South of the Black Sea. Good. All right. All right. Let's move on then. So now we have Alexander's army continues. So Philip of Macedon has risen to power. He's consolidated these states, and where the Persians had wanted to go up and they were repelled, and so now Philip of Macedon has been murdered, and at the age of 20, his son Alexander takes over. And this is a map that I found as a National Geographic map, and it shows some of the campaign by Alexander, that he consolidates these Greek city-states in Macedon, and then he comes over, and at Granicus in 334, the Persians are defeated. And I'm trying to think, this is in your yeah, I believe I'm right about this. If you'll look over in, let's see. No, it's not. It's look at the Hellenistic age. This other one. If you'll look at the first page, under Alexander's empire, succeeding to the throne of Macedon at the death of his father Philip, Alexander proved his military prowess by bringing order into the restive political life of Greece. He succeeded in putting down rebellion in Thrace, Illyria, as a prelude to his greater conquest. By 334, he was ready to cross the Hellespont and undertake the war on Persia, which his father had planned. Soon after entering Asia Minor, Alexander met and defeated a Persian army at the Granicus River near the Hellespont. So that's right up here where we're talking about. The strategic cities of Sardis, Miletus, and Helicanarsis, which Helicanarsis was up in this area. By the way, Helicanarsis reminds us of one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. There was what there? A mausoleum of Helicanarsis. And hence our mausoleums after that. And so read on with me here. The strategic cities of Sardis, Miletus, Helicanarsis were quickly occupied. From Asia Minor, he moved on toward northern Syria, where an army of the Persian king Darius III was routed at Issus in 333. So here's Asia Minor. Now remember, when we get to the book of Acts, we're going to have Paul and Barnabas leaving Antioch, going to Cyprus, and then they go up into Perga, Pamphylia. All this area is where we're reading about now that Alexander is coming through, and Issus is actually north of Antioch of Syria. And so the Alexander routed this Darius III in 333. Keep reading. He proceeded southward along the Mediterranean coast and spent another year in subduing Tyre and Gaza, and then entered into Egypt. Tyre and Gaza were obviously big cities in what ancient kingdom? Well, Tyre was in Phoenicia, and then Gaza down in the Philistia. All right, so we've got them coming down. Exactly. So Alexander is going through Palestine to get down into Egypt. He then entered Egypt. The Egyptians, who resented Persian rule, welcomed Alexander as a liberator, acknowledging him to be the son of Amun-Ra, the Egyptian sun god. He founded the city of Alexandria in Egypt. You can see here, Alexandria is going to be a tremendous spot relative to Jewish history because over 1 million Jews, it's assumed by, a little later, will be residing there. It will be at Alexandria that the Septuagint is translated. Jewish scholars from Jerusalem will be asked to come there, and allegedly, traditionally, 70 of them translated the Hebrew Bible into the Greek language in 72 days. That's the tradition. But nonetheless, it was significant because you not only have a population of Jews, a heavy population here by that time, but all over the all over the Mediterranean world. And so the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures allowed these Jews who have been born now all over the Mediterranean, who really didn't know Hebrew but knew Greek, to know their own Scriptures. And hence, when we have the gospel going into effect, Paul and others, they have just ready audiences. You know, there. Looked like you wanted to say something, Brother Gene.
Oh, I was just thinking about Alexander in Egypt. He had himself, every nation that he conquered, he had himself declared king.
Yes.
Declared Pharaoh.
Yes.
You made the point a while ago that he was supposed to be the
Amun-Ra.
Amun-Ra, and there was some place out in the desert that the pharaohs went to go through some ceremony to be pronounced pharaoh, and he went through that.
Yeah.
So he was really officially
Considered a pharaoh in Egypt.
considered a pharaoh in Egypt, and of course the Greeks in Egypt gave rise to Cleopatra, who was part Greek and part Egyptian.
Yes.
Story about that.
Yes. And then applying with Mark Antony, and then that ends up.
Caesar first.
Yes, exactly. And that will end up with, with what goes on with that machination with the Herods rising in power.
Julius Caesar was helped by Herod the Great and got great favor and granted the kingship over Judea.
Yes. Yeah.
That was about 60 BC.
BC. Exactly.
So the Romans were entrenched in the hierarchy, they looked, all the Herods looked to Rome for their power.
Exactly.
So
of the Greeks. Yes, good. Yeah, very good. On the atlas here, Alexandria became the cultural center for Hellenistic Judaism and later the Christian church. You remember in Acts, the 2nd chapter, when Luke records the people who were gathered there, men from every nation under heaven, and Parthians, Medes, Elamites, dwellers in Mesopotamia, and he mentions even what? Egypt. And so you have people who were faithful Jews who had made a long trek up to Jerusalem, for Passover and Pentecost. All right, keep reading. From Egypt, Alexander retraced his steps northward through Syria. All right, so we have him coming at Alexander, coming back up, and he's going to go in an eastward campaign. His desire to be treated as a god, his arbitrary treatment. I'm sorry, I've skipped a paragraph. He retraced his steps northward and met the armies of Darius at Gaugamela in northern Mesopotamia. After a bitter battle there, Alexandria was able to move southward and take Babylon. And so we're coming in 331 and then southward over here. He then pressed on and successively conquered the Persian capitals at Susa or Shushan, which is where Esther was, and Persepolis and Ecbatana. Farther east, his forces occupied Bactria, which is up in this area, and penetrated into the Punjab region of India, which really goes all the way over here to the Indus River, as these lines show. He came back because of his, in this next paragraph, that was the extent of his conquest. His desire to be treated as a god, his arbitrary treatment of trusted associates, and really his murder of some of them, and his attempt to force his officers to intermingle and marry Persians brought much resentment. The apostle of Hellenism had changed and his popularity began to slip. He came back to Babylon on a return trip to Greece. He died a natural death at the ripe old age of 33. He died of a fever. It's been there's some thought that it might have been from syphilis, but whatever the case was, it had been only 11 years since he left Mesopotamia on an expedition destined to change the course of history. Guys, when we come into the New Testament, and we have so much going on that really came as a result of Alexander enforcing the Greek culture. Then when he died, his kingdom was divided, and a lot of that led really some of the residual effects of the up in the north. I'll have to go to a different map here. Let me come back to this. When the Seleucid dynasty up in Syria area and over in Babylon, Asia Minor, had to pay, I'm getting way ahead, but had to pay taxes to Rome as Rome was coming. They came down and pushed the culture on the Jews. Wanted to wipe out the law, wipe out the Sabbath practice, wipe out circumcision. And so those people who were somewhat for Hellenism or the Greek culture sided with them, the Sadducees, we'd call them classical liberals. And then the ones who were the pious ones, the Pharisees, wanted to keep the law. So the divisions between the Jews were beginning as really a result of the political influences that came to bear on them after the death of Alexander. So, what I know some people it doesn't matter. But I question a lot of stuff. I think, well, how did this happen? How did this begin? And everything has a history. I tell people in classes, individual class, every event, everything you study about, whether it be church history, Bible history, it has a history to it. Something brought this about. And what we're reading about gives us some real insight into why things were as they were. Speaking Greek, the divisions between the Jewish sects during the life of Christ and afterwards. Even Paul going into the ability to go into Asia Minor and Greece all the way to Rome. All of that was made possible by the Romans, And so the background is so helpful.
The Greek influence in New Testament time
Yeah.
east side of the Jordan River, which were Hellenistic cities, to the long-time influence of the Greeks.
Yes, yes. Even Decca, 10, and Polis cities. Yeah, that's exactly right. And, up in the region of Galilee, we'll have Judea, Samaria, then Galilee. Galilee was considered Galilee of the Gentiles because of the nature of their coming in. All right, Lee, do you have something? I know we were talking a lot on the way. Yeah.
Thing about Alexander the Great is he sent 30,000 troops into the area which is Afghanistan and no one returned
Yes. Yeah.
that long ago.
That long ago. That's exactly right. All right. I want us to, if we would, turn in your Waldron material to page 124. And I want us just to kind of look at just a few things that the Waldrons mentioned about Alexander that are not in the Bakers. They have a little bit about the night he was born, the tradition, there was a glow in the eastern sky. It is interesting that let me just ask it this way. Have we studied a prophet that did not mention Alexander by name, but really mentions him in what someone would do? David? Yeah, we certainly did. The book of Daniel mentions it. In the ram, in the goat, you remember? Second paragraph, Alexander. So he's born 356 BC. Now let's just kind of pause here. Put our minds in pause. We think that Nehemiah, when he was recalled to Babylon and returned, probably around 530, 531, 530. I'm sorry, 430, 431, 432. Thank you, Lee. BC. We're thinking that Malachi was probably around that, maybe down to 425 BC. Well, if you think 425 to 356, how many years is that, roughly? 425 to 350. What? Yeah, exactly. 60, 70 years. You think, well, if in our country, go back, I'm between 60 and 70. And I think, I can remember things that happened in 1970 like it was yesterday. And you think people who were there in Malachi's day, who were young, could have been there when Alexander was born and all this. I'm just saying that when you think about it from that point of view, there's not a whole lot of time between the end of the Old Testament and the birth of Alexander. In the next paragraph, he was given a rigorous education, reared under whom? Aristotle. And he had a lot of athletic training, a lot of intellectual training, and he was evidently very scholarly. The next paragraph, it mentions he was impulsive, and some of the early successes seem to be entirely to his luck. The Waldrons even mention he had a horse that he trained early in life that would be with him, a big black horse named what? Bucephalus. Yeah, Cephalus. Hydrocephalus. What does that have to do with? Your head, yes, ox head. Okay, and then in 336, Philip was head of the Hellenic League, a coalition of Greek city-states, and dedicated to the overthrow of Persian power. So we talked about that on the maps. And then the Waldrons began to narrate there what happened with the spread of the Greek culture from Macedon on eastward. Notice that map, by the way, on page 125 is a really good detailed map. If you'll notice on that map, you can see north of Athens. If you look right about where I'm pointing, you can find it yourself. But north of Athens, he has Thebes. Pella is up in Macedon. Then to the right or to the east, Ilium. And all of that is a part of what we'll be studying when we get to Acts. But anyway, it's a good detailed map to follow that as you're looking at the narrative. All right, let's turn the page to 127. We looked at in this second paragraph, the first after the italicized words, in 334, he led men across the Hellespont. We studied that. And next two paragraphs down, in ancient battles, most commonly 2 masses of men would be turned against each other until one line broke or one mass was overcome by fear. Philip had taken the Theban phalanx as the basis for his army formations. If you read the rest of it, it just indicates that there would be soldiers that had long spears, and they would stand behind what? Other soldiers. And they could go in like a horizontal way, or they could go forward, or whatever, and depending on what the enemy was doing. And so even the ones in front, the very front, were protected by the swords of those who were standing behind them. So that was kind of his method of attack. In the next paragraph, when we read of strong victories won by Alexander, we must remember a very important point, that his Macedonians had fought together as a unit for a generation, and having fought together, he really mentions about 3 things here that made the Greeks' warfare extremely successful. They'd been together for a generation. He mentions a little later that they were not afraid of battle, and they had been thoroughly trained. And he gives an illustration about this football team with people who have been together for several years, and then you get some volunteers from the stands and put them again. That's basically what was going on. The Battle of Issus is mentioned there in the last paragraph. If you'll turn the page to 128, he marches down to Tyre. That's in the second full paragraph. We saw that on the chart. And then Tyre was defeated, and then he moved on through Judea. That's on a couple paragraphs later. I'm trying to pick out things that, if you read it, maybe I don't need to call your attention to anything. If you look on the next page, on the first full paragraph, it's about 3 inches down on page 129. Alexander took over the Persian treasuries. He found it, and these were the capitals, Susa, Ecbatana, and Persepolis, the 3 primary capitals and treasure cities of the Persians. And altogether the wealth taken is estimated 180,000 talents of gold, which would be a fortune. Remember, a talent was a weight of about 70 pounds. If you do the math, 70 pounds times 16 ounces, you've got however many thousands that is of ounces, times 180,000, and that's how many. It's an unbelievable amount of gold that he would have amassed. Next paragraph. It was a strange mixture of generosity, magnanimity, and unbelievable cruelty. Some have argued he had a manic depressive personality. He personally slew his own bodyguard. Some of this was in the Baker's Bible Atlas, who had faithfully guarded him since he was a boy. He commanded that one of his commanders be put to death. Since that commander was the son of Parmenio, who had been chief of staff of the Macedonians since the days of his father Philip, he sent envoys to kill him also. His conquest carried him all the way to India, and after that his men refused to go any farther, and he made his way back to Babylon. He drank heavily. His constitution was weakened. He gets sick, and he dies at the age of 32 and 8 months. And then the Waldrons make the point that the conquest of Alexander changed the course of world history, brought about an unprecedented mixing of East and West. Historically, however, since his life was cut short by his early death, the impact of Alexander was not exerted so much by what he did personally as by the actions of his successors who fought for control of his empire. And really that is how it affects the Bible story that we're primarily connected with. All right, these successors follow, and I'd like for you to go back with me just for a moment to page 171. At the very bottom of 171 on this page, when Alexander died, it's the kingdom of his successors. He left no heir. A son was born posthumously to Roxana, his Bactrian wife, but both mother and child were killed during the wars among Alexander's generals who were desirous of seizing the throne for themselves. In 301 BC, at Ipsus in Phrygia, Antigonus, the one-eyed, who laid claim to the entire empire of Alexander, was defeated and slain by his rivals, Seleucus and Lysimachus. And then in the meantime, Ptolemy I, Soter, the son of a Macedonian named Lagus, managed to gain control of Egypt. Ptolemy had been one of Alexander's greatest generals, but he was not present at Ipsus and did not share in the division of the empire. As part of the spoils of war, Seleucus was assigned the whole of Syria, and in theory at least, the Egyptian territory ruled by Ptolemy. However, Palestine was ruled by the Ptolemies. The Seleucids considered it part of their rightful territory. Now, this is where we want to come on, and I want to pass by that and come on to here. Here we have what we mentioned a while ago that I asked David about. You remember when we studied Daniel, the second chapter, and Nebuchadnezzar had a dream and he couldn't interpret, then he forgot what it was. Daniel reminded him what it was and then interpreted it. And thou, O king, art the head of gold, and there will rise another inferior kingdom, Medo-Persian, and then the Grecian, and then the Roman. And then in the 8th chapter, we have another vision with a ram and a goat. And it has to be identified with Alexander and also the two generals that would have sway over, let's turn over to that passage, the sway over the area of Israel. Go to Daniel, the 8th chapter, real quickly, and we're going to have to stop in just a moment. But you'll notice in verse 20 of Daniel 8, the ram which thou sawest that had two horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. And the rough he-goat is the king of Greece. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. And as for that which was broken in the place whereof four stood up, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not with his power. The generals who would rule over those 4 basic areas would not ever be as powerful as just Alexander was when they were all confederate. So we have that there. Seleucus shaped an empire. He included Thrace, Asia Minor, Syria, Babylon, Media, on to India. Founded the city of Antioch in Syria. Ptolemy was beginning a kingdom in Egypt. So you got 2 generals, Seleucus and Ptolemy, and they're occupying 2 different places. In this map here, you'll notice the Seleucid Kingdom is primarily to the north of where our interest lies in Israel. It's north and primarily east. And the Ptolemaic Kingdom is primarily south, Egypt, and so on. But it will be the Ptolemies who will rule in Palestine first, and really in a spirit of leniency. And that's where we're getting to right now. And we'll have to stop because of our time. But if you'll go ahead and read the Baker Bible Atlas material, and then read what is stated here relative to the kingdom after Alexander died, and Lord willing, we'll try to pick that up, and then finish, Lord willing, Sunday with the end of this going into Rome. That's what our plan is. Comment or question?